listening to a delay on like 10 seconds is mind-numbing. All right, everybody, welcome to the Denver Node.js meetup. How many of you here, it's your first time? All right, that's a large number. Welcome, welcome. We do this every single month on the third Thursday. This month we have an amazing talk. But before we get that, I want to thank our sponsors. So to begin with, we have Google. They're providing the food for us. So we could thank them for our pizza and our salad. This is also the last month that they're sponsoring us. They've been a super long time sponsor. So thank you to them for years of sponsorship. But that also means that we're looking for sponsors. So if any of you are working for any companies who want to sponsor us, we'd be very happy to chat with you. Also, we're sponsored by Code Talent for both the space here and also the drinks. So Andrew here is actually from Code Talent. They rarely hear it. So Andrew, you want to say any words?
I don't really have much to say, but I just wanted to stop by and say hello. If you guys are interested in what's going on with Marketplace, my business card is up there, and I can tell you all about the positions that we have available. Thank you.
All right, before we begin, do any of you have any announcements you'd like to make to the community at large? Going once. Going twice. All right, well, I think it's going to be sold to our speaker tonight. So I've had the privilege of working with Kyle for three years. I was a lead instructor at Galvanize, while he was also the director of education or faculty director there. And we did a lot when we were moving education forward. And since then, he's moved on to the Flatiron School, which is like a walk from here, so a lot easier to get here. I won't bother you because you're not here to watch me talk. So instead, I'll just hand you over to Kyle.
All right, so while we're getting started, this address up here, sli.do Slido, if you go to that on your phone and use the event code 1337, you can ask questions and you can vote on stuff and what have you. Why are you shaking your head at me, Marlena? No reason. You guys are in charge of the talk tonight, believe it or not. So that's what we're going to be using to run stuff. And while you're doing that, I'd actually like to start out with a play. So Stacy and Toby, come on up. So Toby is a student, and he's going to be sitting right there. Stacy is his math teacher. Let us look into a modern mathematics classroom.
Why is 2 plus 3 equal to 3 plus 2?
Because both equal 5.
No. The correct answer is because the commutative law of addition holds. Why is 9 plus 2 equal to 11?
9 and 1 are 10, and 1 is more than 11?
Wrong. The correct answer is that by the definition of 2, 9 plus 2 equals 9 plus 1 plus 1. But because of the associative law of addition holds, 9 plus 1 plus 1 equals 9 plus 1 plus 1. Now, 9 plus 1 is 10 by the definition of 10, and 10 plus 1 is 11 by the definition of 11.
Evidently, the class is not doing too well, so the teacher tries a simpler question.
Is 7 a number?
The students, taken aback by the simplicity of the question, hardly deem it necessary to answer, but by sheer habit of obedience, they reply affirmatively. The teacher is aghast.
If I ask you who you are, what would you say?
The students are now wary of replying, but the courageous youngster does so.
I'm Robert Smith.
You mean that you are the name Robert Smith? Of course not. You are a person, and your name is Robert Smith. Now, let's get back to my original question. Is 7 a number? Of course not. It is the name of a number. 5 plus 2, 6 plus 1, 8 minus 1 are names for the same number. The symbol 7 is a numeral for the number.
The teacher sees that the students do not appreciate the distinction, and so she tries another tack.
Is the number 3 half of the number 8? Of course not. But the numeral 3 is half of the numeral 8, the right half.
The students are now bursting to ask, what then is a number? However, they are so discouraged by the wrong answers they have given that they no longer have the heart to voice the question. This is extremely fortunate for the teacher because to explain what a number really is would be beyond their capacity and certainly beyond the capacity of the students to understand it. So thereafter, the students are careful to say that 7 is a numeral, not a number. Just what a number is, they never find out. The teacher is not fazed by the pupils' poor answers.
How can we express properly the whole numbers between 6 and 9?
Why, just 7 and 8?
No. It is a set of numbers which is the intersection of the set of whole numbers larger than 6 and the set of whole numbers less than 9.
Thus, the students are taught the use of sets and presumably precision. A teacher thoroughly convinced of the vaunted value of precise language and wishing to ask the students whether a number of lollipops equals a number of girls phrases the question thus.
Find out if the set of lollipops is in 1-to-1 correspondence with the set of girls.
Needless to say, she gets no answer from the students. Bent but not broken, the teacher asks one more question.
How much is 2 divided by 4?
-2.
How did you get that result?
Well, you've taught us that division is repeated subtraction. I subtracted 4 from 2 and got -2.
It would seem the poor children would deserve some relaxation after school, but parents, anxious to know what progress their children are making, also query them. Stacy, so we're back at home now. Stacy's back in the classroom, and Robert Smith's dad shows up. So, anxious to see what progress their children are making, one parent asks their child,
How much is 5 plus 3?
5 plus 3 equals 3 plus 5 by the commutative law.
Flabbergasted, they rephrase the question.
But how many apples are 5 apples and 3 apples?
The child didn't quite understand that and means plus, so he asked,
Do you mean 5 apples plus 3 apples?
How is this class going?
Not so well. The teacher keeps talking about associative, commutative, and distributive laws. I just add and get the right answer, but my teacher doesn't like that.
Cool, and scene. Round of applause for the actors.
God help him, they get the JavaScript number.
I have a confession. When I started out as a music teacher, I was an elitist. I was trying to correct all the mistakes that I thought that I had in my music education. I had gotten really into music theory, and the deeper that I went with music theory, the more I was like, oh, all of this would have made so much more sense if we just started with this. I feel like I'm picking it up so late, I felt like I was at a disadvantage. And so when I became a music teacher, I was going to fix all that. I was going to start with the theory. And one of the very first things that I learned about that was that you go, okay, cool, I know you came here to learn music, but I have some really interesting where are you going? And as a private music teacher, losing students very quickly trains you to stop doing that. So what I ended up figuring out is that I could actually teach all the theory stuff that I wanted to, but I had to buy little bits of attention out of that by getting wins for the students. And so, and then furthermore, every time I taught a student something practical, there was always an opportunity to get the principles, the foundations, the theory, any of that kind of stuff in there. And if the student was continuing to make progress on that, that bought me the attention I needed to get that stuff in there. And which was not what was happening when I was starting with theory. So, and one other thing that I realized was kind of interesting after, students started sticking around a little bit is there were some of these wonky theory things that I knew that weren't actually all that useful. And so those wouldn't make it into the lessons. It's like, oh, where can I put this? Where can I put this? Where can I put this? And at some point I realized, well, if this doesn't have a practical use, maybe it just doesn't fucking matter. That probably taught me more than anything about how to approach education in any topic. So for the last 5 years, I've been teaching software development. I taught at Galvanize for a while. I've been teaching at Flatiron for the last year. And for some reason, like, programmers think that they know everything. And so they also go, this would have been so much easier to learn if I just had the foundations, if I'd had these bedrock principles. I've seen this described as the things that don't change. If we just started there, and it ends up being the exact same thing.
First principles.
First principles. Why can't we do this from first principles? Why can't we deduce our way into making apps? And it ends up being the exact same thing, but there isn't the same kind of cultural expectation that, like, I'm sorry, you went to guitar lessons and you didn't learn how to play guitar? It's like, well, we talked about how one might approach playing guitar. That obviously doesn't fly, except it does for some reason when we're talking about coding education. So for the last 5 years, I've been not doing that. And either flabbergasting people or pissing people off or disappointing various people other than the people being taught. The people being taught are able to pick things up. They're able to demonstrate stuff. They're able to stick around long enough to get to the principles and the theory and all those kinds of things. Rather than washing out early and going, yeah, I guess I just didn't have the brain for it. So that's the background that I wanted to give you on this, but you guys are in charge of this, so I'm going to hop over to Slido and see what we got going on. And you can keep doing this throughout. The way that this works is I'm going to talk about the most upvoted answer. It could be, or question. It could be one of mine. It could be one that you added in there. And I'm going to, let's start with 4 minutes. I'm going to put 4 minutes on a timer. And then after 4 minutes, we're going to do a Roman vote. So that's thumbs down, thumbs sideways, thumbs up. And if we don't have like a plurality of thumbs ups, then we just move on to the next topic. If we do want to keep talking about this topic, we keep going. So I haven't done this before, so I'm a little anxious about it. Thanks for experimenting with me. But I wanted to do something that, kind of put y'all in control of the talk, so we make sure that we're talking about stuff that's interesting to you. All right, so top voted question right now is, how do you get better at teaching? Great question. So 4 minutes on the clock. I would say that we just kind of talked about it. The first thing you want to get away from is this idea of really reaching for the foundations and principles. A lot of that stuff comes to you later, and that's not a problem. That's not a mistake. What you need to find is something you can connect an idea to. And by connect an idea, it needs to be something that a student kind of knows already. So I have some diagrams that I put together to illustrate some of these things. For this one, brains. So how your brain works is this sensory input you get. This can be somebody talking to you, something, a diagram like this that you're seeing. First thing that's intercepting that is your thalamus. And what your thalamus is the traffic cop for your brain. You're taking in so much sensory data all the time, around the clock, and some of it's relevant to you and some of it's not. So the stuff that isn't relevant gets flushed out down the bottom, like this. And then what's happening up here is it's looking for neural patterns that you already have and saying, does this match anything that I've experienced before? And if you can't make that connection, it gets flushed out. So one of the things that I think that you can do is, rather than talking about an abstract concept, what's something real, a problem that the students actually had that can create a need to learn whatever you're about to talk about. Now you're creating relevance, and the things that you're saying have a much higher chance of getting a foothold. And then part of the challenge with that is that you're really never telling the entire story. There's this idea of, I call them little lies. So I'll give you an example of a little lie. So going back to music, one of the first things you learn in music is scales. So you go, all right, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That's a C major scale. And so you start with something like that. It's just like the alphabet. All right, I can make a connection to that. Except it stops at G and starts over again. All right? That's a mind-sized byte. That's something that somebody can grab onto. But it's not really the whole story. In fact, once we start going a little bit deeper, we find out that all of these are kind of laid out up and down on a staff. We go, that's actually more like C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And these go up in pitch. And then the next piece of detail that you add to that is that not all the notes are the same distance apart from each other. So if we have, these are piano keys. We've got C, D, but then E and F are right next to each other, and they don't have a black key in between. It's because the pattern for a major scale is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. But that's actually not the whole story either. There's some frequency relationships that all these things have with each other that sort of dictate how the scale works. And they're all, some of them are this percentage of an octave apart, and some of them are this percentage of an octave apart, but they're all like roughly evenly spaced out. And then you realize that's actually not true either. What's really the case is we have these fairly complex frequency ratios that weren't possible to do on a piano. And so we evened them out, and we sort of split the difference on all of them. So everything's sort of equally out of tune. But the problem is, that's all like fascinating to me. If you start there, you're about to have an ex-music student. You need to start more like here. Cool, so we're at 4 minutes. Let's do a quick Roman vote. Who wants me to keep talking about teaching? Okay, I'm still seeing some thumbs up. I'm going to put 3 more minutes.
When's the ska music section?
Stop. So you're always trying to look for the relevance. And one of the ways you can sort of fake this a little bit is, this is a go-to trick for college professors. You go, okay, you need to know this because it's going to be on the test. And so that creates like some temporary relevance for you, but it also encourages you to pass the test rather than learning the shit to begin with. So yeah, that's like almost never the trick that you want to use, but it's useful to be aware that like that is how that sort of functions in college. Another thing I would say for teaching, I mentioned a little bit earlier, look for wins. What is something that somebody can get right and feel proud of immediately? Because that gives you a basis for a couple things. One, it's getting them buy-in so they don't feel like they need to quit or do something else or they were never cut out for this. But also, you're creating a new thing that's relevant. Now you have like another thing that you could hook into and get the next abstraction. So as we go from alphabet to staff to keyboard to circles and stuff, each win a student gets forms a foundation for whatever the next thing is. And then a couple more ideas about teaching. First thing you want to do, and this is true if you're coaching somebody at work, if you're in front of a classroom, is you need to have an objective. You need to have a measurable objective. In software, you can compare this to TDD. What is the test that we are trying to make pass? When will I know that I'm done? And so a measurable objective might be something like, you can define what a scale is. And maybe the assessment for that is you can identify C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C as a scale. And maybe you contrast that with something that skips around a little bit more. Like, is that a scale? And so you're trying to figure out what that is first, up front, before you start trying to do any teaching. And I use a trick called triple planning, where you have whatever that objective is. So, like the objective is identify major scales. Second part of the plan is the assessment. for that. So for the assessment, you might go, okay, I show them this, this, and this, and they're able to get all the right ones right. And then you go, cool, what is the student, this is the most critical part of this, what is the student going to do to be able to know enough to pass that assessment? And then the last part of this is, what am I, as an instructor, going to do to help them? This completely flips like the more college kind of model around, because the more college kind of model is, what am I going to do and how am I going to check whether or not the student paid enough attention? And that's like a very like test last kind of idea in software. And just like in software, we get the same kind of sloppy ass fucking results, because there's a lot of good ways to get to this, but we're trying to identify the best one. But we can't identify the best one if we don't know where we're going. Otherwise, we just end up talking in circles, talking about stuff that's tangentially related. We can never find the actual problem. Okay, so that's 3 minutes. Give me another vote. Should I keep talking about teaching? Okay, moving on. Next one is, how do you get better at learning? Wonderful. So the most important part of learning is tight feedback loops. And this is true whether or not we're playing basketball or learning how to code or learning French. We want the amount of time from when you get some kind of performance prompt and then you perform and then you get feedback on whether or not you did it right. We want to make that as quick as possible. So, for example, like sports, this ends up coming pretty easily. Practicing free throws, this is, all right, I need to make a free throw, I do it, and the ball goes in or it doesn't. That's our feedback loop. This gets a little bit trickier with more abstract things like work. And so to give you like an opposite example, think about your annual performance review at work. That's fucking worthless because you're trying to summarize a year's worth of work way too much. The frequency isn't enough for you to take in that feedback and get better, because the reality of this is, if we go back to the that brain diagram, this traffic cop, okay, it is relevant, neat. Now we're going to start encoding it and storing it. But it does it in kind of a sloppy way. So this is a neural network. And what happens as you're learning something is we start creating neural pathways that equal, I know how to throw a free throw correctly. I know how to describe what a closure is. All of those things exist as neural networks. But the first time you try to do it, you can think of it as like something that's not traced very deeply. And so we go, okay, cool. I'm going to do it again and trace it a little bit deeper. But that only works if you did it right and you know that you did it right. Because this neural network doesn't have any sense of time. It doesn't go, I did it wrong, I did it wrong, I did it wrong, I did it wrong, and did it right once. Cool, moving on. Neural networks don't work that way. What you got is 5 times of like deepening the wrong neural network and 1 time doing the right one. And so we need the feedback loop of, I got it right, it's going deeper, and it's getting more automatic. That is a key part to this. It's also why you can't remember shit from that book you read one time. How many books you've read where you don't even remember the central fucking thesis of it, much less any like core details or awesome takeaways from the book. And it's because you didn't rehearse it. The rehearsal is like the next part of this. We need a feedback loop and we need a lot of rehearsal to get good at anything. And there's another idea, it's kind of related, called transmissionism. And transmissionism is like a very college-y kind of idea that you know something because I said it. You know something because you read it. And it's bullshit. It's just not true. The only way you can know something, knowing something is its existence in this neural network. And if you don't use a neural network, it starts fading away over time. You keep using it, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper, which leads to our little Hebb's law thing here. Neurons that fire together, survive together, and wire together. And what's kind of interesting about this is that neural network is made up of a ton of different neurons. And when that network gets deep, when any one of them fire, the rest of them fire too. And this actually has some kind of troubling implications about things like addiction. I know a lot of writers who will write and drink. But the problem is now that becomes part of the neural network. And you'll see a lot of people who sober up and then they can't do their thing anymore. It's because that's part of the neural network. Or they go, oh no, I just start drinking and then it just comes out of me. It's because it's part of that neural network. So big takeaways I want to have on that are tight feedback loops and lots of performance opportunities. Rehearsal. Okay, we're at 4 minutes. Roman vote. Do I keep talking about this? I'm going to go with no. All right. So, next question. Once someone is in their first job, how can they most effectively improve their skills, especially if they're under-supported by their team? Great question. So, I would say a couple things. Your support can come from a lot of different places, not necessarily on your team, and there's probably some ways you can get support out of your team that don't feel like they're like, oh no, we gotta drag the new kid along. Ugh. So some avenues you have for support. One of the best ones is Denver Devs. So if you're not on Never Devs, you should be. Who's on Never Devs? Yeah. Cool. So if you want to talk to all of these people, during work hours, ask them questions, get feedback about your code, there's 9,500 or something of us on there right now. And there's all kinds of help channels, and it's 100% appropriate for you to ask something like, I'm kind of new at this job. I was tasked with something like this. I feel like this is a reasonable approach. What do all of you think? And so if you're not getting that feedback from your manager or your coworkers, that's a resource that you have. Another one, kind of the opposite of this, is you can seek out a mentor. This could be like somebody that you met at a meetup, just like this. This can be a buddy of yours that works in code, even if it's not necessarily the exact same thing that you're doing. Maybe you had a friend that's an embedded systems engineer, but you're a web developer. A lot of this stuff is more like getting used to culture. And another big part of it is knowing what is yeah, you got to adapt to that. And what's oh, you're on a shitty team. That is not at all a reasonable environment that you're in. And a mentor can do a lot to help clarify that for you. Other things you can do within your team is be proactive about feedback. Management is hard, ergo most people are really bad at it. That's what something being hard means. So your manager is probably has a better than not chance of not hunting you down and asking how you're doing and asking to see your code or anything like that. So one of the things you can do is when you hit a block, do this. Follow some kind of troubleshooting protocol. So I tried this, I looked up this, I went through these resources, I tried these things, and these are the results I got. So make sure you have all of that stuff assembled, and then come to somebody on your team with all of that. If the response is, oh my God, you can't be bothering me with this kind of stuff right now, you're on a shitty team and you should look elsewhere. But most people will be very gracious about that. The thing that irritates more established folks, newer folks do, is when they go, well, this doesn't work and I haven't even tried anything. But if you can demonstrate the process that you went through to try to figure something out, there's a pretty good chance that you'll get some feedback, but you're probably going to have to be proactive about it. Cool. So that's 2 minutes. Should I keep talking about this? All right, the no's have it. All right, next one is, what's up with online courses? So there's a couple things that I think online courses do super badly. And the reason that they do it super badly is kind of obvious. It's because developers are all fucking such know-it-alls. They can do something hard, ergo they must know everything about everything. And so they're me, the music teacher, going, oh, I know how I could explain this where it'll make sense. And a lot of times they're repeating those exact same kind of like theory first principles kinds of mistakes. So and also, even the ones that are pretty decent, if you're not doing the exercises, if you're just kind of reading along, yeah, cool, that's just the book's problem all over again. You are, even if you remember it right then, even if you remember it a week from now, 2 weeks, 3 weeks out, you're not going to remember a single thing from that course. So you have to practice, you have to rehearse. But another thing that tends to go wrong with these is poor, or more likely, no assessment. This is huge. This is like the feedback loop thing. An assessment is a feedback loop. And if like even just seeing that word like kind of made you like cringe a little bit, we're not talking about your midterm in high school or college or something like that. Assessment just means opportunity for feedback. So if the course doesn't have that, there's no way for you to know how well you are or aren't doing in it. And then the worst kinds of assessments, I'll see these in a lot of things that have like very technically impressive assessment platforms, is they'll ask a couple multiple choice questions, or ask a couple true-false questions, and they'll use that as a basis for whether or not you're ready to move on. Then that's extremely low resolution and very prone to error. It doesn't mean that I don't think anybody should ever use those, but they're at such a low level of reliability that that's good if I wanted to figure out which of you remembered some vocab word that I just said. I can get like a smell of that pretty easily with like a really low-cost assessment like that, but it doesn't actually tell me whether or not you understand anything. And so that's like the first thing that I think online courses do universally badly. Another one is that they're very heavily lecture-based. Lectures are borderline useless for retaining knowledge. So instead, what you want to do is lots of active learning. And like active learning is when the students are like actively participating in the process, ideally more so than the instructors. But those are hard to do on Udemy and things like that. The old code school, some of those sites that have like the built-in code editors, those are a little bit better, but a big problem they have is a problem called the drill versus scrimmage problem. So these are two entirely different learning scenarios. A drill is something that distorts whatever the real thing is. So it's usually something that's especially difficult and a difficult part of a particular skill that you need to drill, you need to rehearse, you need to deepen your neural network on. And so you do it over and over and over again. This is free throw lines in basketball, layup lines, any of those kinds of things. Scrimmage is like a mock version of the game. So in software, this is make an app. Both of them have a ton of utility, but a lot of those things will overemphasize scrimmage and go way too light on drill. They'll maybe even have some distorted thing. And so like in a lot of those courses will be like, I set up all of these things, you fill in the missing code. And like, that's awesome, that's a great drill. But you need to do that 10, 15, 20 more times. And a lot of them just don't offer that kind of stuff. And then the last like big axe to grind I have about online courses is something I call topic ghettos, which I hope I'll get a chance to talk more about. A topic ghetto is when we artificially isolate some skill from how it's being used, like where it gets used in real life. And while you should isolate skills and sub-skills when you're drilling, it still ultimately needs to be connected to something real. And this helps us get past that like relevance barrier and lots of other things. but every time I see something that's like, learn Go, to do what? Like, what are you making with Go? And so I'd much rather see something like build a performant API with Go, but that's usually not how those online courses are like packaged and sold. All right, we're at 4 minutes. I keep talking about this. All right, the no's have it. So next topic is best story, day, or anecdote at Flatiron. So, that's a good one. So, if you haven't been able to discern so far, I have some opinions about education, and those don't always like coincide with like the organizations I'm a part of. And like, I'm trying to say this in a way that's not an outright lie. I was gonna say I try to color inside the lines. I super don't though.
You're recording.
Yeah, I don't even think I actually make that much of an effort. But I'll say that like I'm not a terribly easy educator to manage, and so there's some stuff that I do to try to improve the educational experience that I have to like keep a secret, and I've had like a couple like opportunities recently where a lot of the people that I was keeping that a secret from are like just moved on from the organization, and a lot of people that are very interested in some of the things that I'm doing are now like, oh no, don't keep that a secret. Like, how do we get more people? I had a meeting with someone who's like, can you help me follow fewer rules? And I was like, well, can I? And so that culminated kind of recently in like an award that I got for the company that like kind of recognized some of that. And I was like, oh shit, all right, we might be able to build something here after all. Hell yeah, baby. But I'd say like from like an event kind of thing, one of my I always love graduations. Anybody in the audience has been in a class that I've graduated. I'm such a big soppy mess at every single graduation. But this last one in particular, it was the first time that we'd done the Flatiron Charge. So if you're currently a student, let me see if I can find it. Oh shit, turn that phone off. Oh, I got it over here. Never mind. Maybe it's in here, maybe. But it's like I spent a lot of time thinking about what I want to here it is. What I want to charge graduates of this program with being responsible for. And so my partner in education crime, Kim Schlesinger, and I kind of worked on this one together, and we came up with we charge you to be authentic. The lessons you learned before you came here still matter, and the world needs them. Be yourself. Already gonna start crying. We charge you to be compassionate, build community, actively include others, and tear down gates. And we charge you to be courageous. Trust yourself, run toward danger, and rise to the challenges presented to you. And so I've graduated 26 cohorts of Code School Cats at this point. And it was a very proud moment to like share that one, because I think it is a culmination of all of those things. And now that there's so many people that graduated from programs that Kim and I have been running 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, it really is turning into like this community of people that have different expectations of what education can and should be, and what community should look like. And so it's a very fun time. It's a very proud moment to be able to share that with the students. Cool, and I'm gonna thumbs down that one because I think that's all I have to say about it. Thank you. All right, what is the best way for young people to get into learning code? So when I was a music teacher, one of the things that would happen a lot is parents would bring their kids in and they go, well, this is Johnny, and Johnny has this crazy idea that he wants to play guitar, but we're going to make him do 5 years of piano lessons first. And I'd always just go like ashen face. It's like, wow, you are about to have an ex-musician on your hands. That's how you train somebody to fucking hate music. They want to learn how to play guitar. Let them fucking learn guitar. There's no like magic thing with starting with piano or anything like that. And I think it's a similar thing with programming. Is your kid interested in programming? Is a young person interested in programming? If they're not, start by trying to like cultivate that. But also don't force it on them. Like different kids are into different stuff. Like my kid, my oldest son, does not have like any kind of programming interest at all. But he is really interested in electronics. He's 7. He can solder. He likes gadgets. He likes all that kind of stuff. Maybe he gets to the programming thing. Maybe he doesn't. So like, just a word of caution there. Don't try to like put the square peg in the round hole. But let's say there is something like, no, I think programming is kind of interesting. What do you think is interesting about it? Maybe it's I don't know. I just thought like it'd be kind of cool to make a game. So then we're back to like the best practices of teaching kind of thing. Figure out a way to get wins immediately. So things like Scratch are super good for that. But anything where you can get them making a game. But don't first principles it. Don't go like, all right, well, let's start talking about arrays and sets and data structures. Try to focus on making games. Keep this fun. Get the wins going. That'll buy you enough attention, because the reality is, let's say they keep wanting to make games. They're going to hit some block where they need the next thing. Cool. Now you have a reason to learn that. Now that has relevance. So now when they go, oh, that's why I need to learn the graph data structure, because that's how I solve that problem. That's how I make that feature. That's how I do that level that I haven't been able to do before. And they'll have been invested in this long enough that there's all these different hooks that these ideas can hang on to, and they're not secretly resenting you as a parent for making them take piano lessons and coding. Cool. I'm going to thumbs down myself on that one, too. That's all I have to say on the matter. All right, next one is, how should school look? So there's a couple things that I would consider the hallmarks of a good school. So one kind of concept, well, actually, let me start with this. One of them is, I call this the 3 C's. So the first one is curriculum. And this is where a lot of schools, especially like things like code schools, stop. They go, well, we'll get the right curriculum, and curriculum scales so well. You write it once, and then hundreds of people can take it, thousands of people take it, millions of people can take it. But it's a third of the process, and it actually ends up being the least important one. Next C is community. And I think this one gets treated as a nice to have way too often. I think it is a critical part of a formal education experience. Community in this case is other people who are going through the same thing as you at the same time, where you can lean on each other and ask each other questions and commiserate and teach each other. Creating a learning community is, like, I think a non-negotiable part of a learning experience. I heard a really good measurement for whether or not you have a good classroom culture is, does your classroom require like all of those people to be there, or would it be just as good if you're teaching everybody one-on-one? And I think for good classroom instruction, the people in the classroom, like, you need all of them there for that culture to really happen. And that's especially true in like transformational education, like we do in the code schools and stuff, because it's brutal. It is absolutely brutal. You're learning to think of yourself in a completely different way. And like old man Coberly telling you that it gets better, like you belong here and all this kind of, it only goes so far. You need other people who are right there with you in it. And then the last C is coaching. Another way to put this would be a human being who cares about your outcome. And that doesn't scale. That is the problem with things like Lambda and all these like VC-backed boot camps, is they're trying to find some magical scaling factor that turns this into a 10x opportunity, and it does not exist because of that. The absolute best I've seen on this is like maybe like in the 15-to-1 kind of ratio for students and teachers. You need to be able to track somebody's progress, and they need to be able to say like, hey, you seem like you're checking out a little bit. You seem like you're struggling. Let's talk a little bit. If nobody cares about your outcome, you're going to drop out. Like, it's so hard to stay motivated in a formal curriculum like that if you don't have a human being who gives a shit whether or not you make it. And so those are 3 things that I would consider non-negotiable for an education experience. Some other like less, I don't know, bombastic things, or maybe so. I don't like homework. I do not think that homework has like that valuable a place in K-12. I don't think it should be in adult education. I would much rather see the time you have in the program being used more effectively. Sometimes, like after school, there's stuff you need to catch up on. Sometimes after school, you're at a meetup like this and networking and any of these kinds of things. That's totally fine. And I feel like once you start piling on it, there's only so much you can cram into a day. And when I hear about schools that do this like 6-day weeks, 12 hours, that's performance theater. That's not backed by any kind of education, anything. All you're doing is getting more worn out and more tired. And just like when you're like, I don't know, I get super creative when I stay up all night. No, you don't. The oxygen deprivation makes you think that. It's go like, I'm working so hard. No, you're not. You're giving the appearance of working hard. They're not the same thing. And so for that reason, like, I'd much rather see like a tight, aggressive day and then lots of rest, lots of relaxation, and not just adding shit to say that like, oh, we got a timeline to keep. All right, we're at time. Who wants me to keep talking about this? I'm seeing some thumbs up. All right, I'm gonna keep talking about it. Another thing that I think is really important is for schools to be mastery-based. A lot of people get very hung up on this particular word. So for everything I'm about to say about mastery, stop thinking about it the way that you would in just the English language. And this is like an education term that Kyle made up. So what I mean by mastery-based is that a school can either be fixed mastery, variable time, or it can be fixed time, variable mastery. Almost every formal education experience you've had, from K-12 to college to corporate training to any of those things, is fixed time, variable mastery. I'm going to teach you for 6 weeks. I'm going to teach you for 4 years. I'm going to teach you for whatever, and you get what you get out of it. So we want to do the other way around. We want to do, this might take you a day, this might take you a month, this might take you a year, but you will be able to do this like demonstrable set of skills. So we say that's fixed mastery, variable time. Now, operationally, that's really fucking hard to pull off, but it's not impossible. We do hard stuff all the time. Organizing a school around this idea is like, there's not a ton of great examples for it, but there's also not none. And I feel like it's like especially unbrave when things like code schools will just carbon copy the shit that they got from colleges when they don't have to. Like these schools, they don't have teachers' unions, they don't have state regulations, they don't have any barriers to change. And anytime I see a school just do college but faster, fuck off, man. So I'd like to see more mastery-based education. Now, consequence of that is super scary to a lot of educators is immediately your students aren't all in the same place. But here's the spoiler alert, they never were. You're just tricking yourself. It's like, you're a junior at this school. That doesn't mean that that person knows the same amount of stuff or can perform the same skills as some other junior. It just means they've been there about the same amount of time without getting kicked out. So if you're doing a mastery-based curriculum, you need to be able to tailor the education to every single individual student. Now, having done this a lot, that's less daunting than it sounds, because you tend to not have 120 discrete different places. You end up with little clumps and clusters. Now, one of the cool things about a program like this is if you can address those groups, people don't stick with the same cluster of people the whole way through. A lot of times somebody who's behind or slow or something like that, if you can get the intervention at the right time, that's a very temporary condition. And there's usually some big idea that they're not getting. And if they can get the intervention immediately instead of at the end of the semester or when the test comes or something like that, they go, oh, and zoom ahead. And as an example, the first group that I did this end-to-end with, which I did with Ms. Marlena Baker, was, so this was about 25 students or so, wildly varying skill levels coming in. Some of them not especially proficient computer operators coming in. Some of them had some programming background, maybe they did some IT stuff, a little bit here and there. Those are very different starting places. But the ultimate spread on this was fastest students did a six-month program nominally in about 5 months. The slowest student, who had a traumatic brain injury and pretty severe learning disabilities also, took 8 months. And this is a very tight curve. I'd say most people were within 2-3 weeks of each other. But even just not having the performance pressure to graduate, have everything done on the exact same day as everybody else, changed everything. All of a sudden it's I need a couple days, I just take a couple days. That changes the entire dynamic. Somebody goes, oh my god, I had such a bad day, I'm so far behind. Okay, you're not actually behind. Just dust yourself off, have a better day tomorrow. And over a longer program, 3 months, 6 months, that stuff all kinds of ends up washing out. Cool, we're at time. Who wants me to keep talking about this? Cool, thumbs down. Questions addressed. All right, next one. Should I be worried about an oversaturation of React developers? Great question. No. So I would say, next question. I get asked some variant of this probably 3 times a month. It's usually phrased as are boot camps saturating the market with junior developers? I get asked that one a lot. Or how many Rails jobs could there be? Any of these kinds of things. And there's actually some hard numbers on this that is the first study of its kind I think that I've seen that was specifically about code schools, but people are always very surprised when I tell them what the numbers on that are. In the state of Colorado, in the last 8 years, in across disciplines, so this is UI UX programs, software development programs, data science programs, there have been only 2,600 grads in Colorado in the last 8 years. It's not that fucking many. And in Denver in the last 5, I've taught 600 in Denver. That's probably half the grads out of Denver. There's probably another 600 from GA and some of the smaller schools. It's just not that many. Meanwhile, the number of jobs being added, new jobs being brought to Colorado every year is something like 80,000 in software development. No, but how many of those are junior jobs? Like, here's like the dirty truth about junior jobs is that nobody posts for juniors. You can't. You go, I'm looking for a junior developer who is proficient in Rails and React. Like, you won't even get junior all the way out of your mouth before you just get flooded with the resumes of the laziest code school grads. And so everybody goes like, I'm looking for a developer. And it's never your job to disqualify yourself. So you put it says this is a senior developer, it's a mid developer, it's whatever. They're looking for someone with 5 years of experience, and I only have 15 weeks. It's never your job to disqualify yourself. And if that company got the laundry list of super impressive things that they wanted, they probably also wouldn't be able to find somebody who's willing to work for the $60,000 a year that they're offering. You might be the absolute best option they have. So that's thing number one. Now to the particular question about React, I wouldn't worry about that either. And here's why. So if we sort of segment tech jobs into, we'll call this enterprise land. So this is every job in the DTC. This is a lot of the big companies that are doing like second headquarters here. All right, so that's one kind of job. Next kind of job, we'll call startup land. So in startup land, everybody is using React, which also that's not true. There's Ember shops in town. There's Vue shops in town. So all right, so that's this. This is growing fucking rapidly. I don't know if you've noticed. There's a mass exodus of companies out of San Francisco and Portland and Austin and all these places where they can't afford to hire people to live in those cities. So they come places like this. So we'll have no shortage of these jobs, and a lot of them are super React-y. Of those like 80,000 that are getting added here. Okay, that's in startup land. In enterprise land, don't see it quite as much yet. What you see a lot of is Angular, and that's kind of new for them. What they were before was jQuery, and what they were before that was BobX, some hand-rolled piece of shit that the entire company has to use. Now, the thing is, this is the exact same thing that happened in startup land. Startup lands also had their own version of BobX. And then all of them were like, oh man, you know jQuery, you'll always have a job. And then, well, if it's supported by Google, why would I ever not want to use it? Then they all went through the Angular thing, and now they're here. The enterprises are going to be there like next year. Some of them are like starting to head there now. It's like, we're rewriting our Angular app in React, which is probably a terrible idea. But if you're a React dev, I would say you have no shortage of employment opportunities. Cool. I'm going to thumbs down myself on that one. And we're at 8, so I'm going to do one more. What do computer science programs get wrong, and what do they get right? Excellent. This is a great question. So, the thing that... Okay, so my first gripe isn't directly with computer science programs, but it's more with college in general. So... So this is kind of how college works. We take all these different topics, and then we isolate the fuck out of them. We isolate them from everything else and try to teach them in this very narrow way, which we struggle with relevance on that. It's hard to like find hooks to grab in, and also in this process, you end up teaching these things in a very disingenuous way, because none of these disciplines developed independently of each other. Like, history didn't happen separately from the things that happened in history. And so it's way more authentic to look at these things in combination. And one of the big problems that we're facing right now, I think, is that app development is, so I have this here as marketing and psychology and software engineering and design, not really computer science. But if we go back 30, 40 years, like the equivalent kind of thing, probably is like applied computer science. When we're working with phenomenally limited resources and very low-level languages, and we're doing memory management and all this kind of stuff, computer science is probably a lot more applicable. For app development, I would way rather have somebody that has a killer background in marketing, psychology, or design than somebody who has a killer background in computer science. And that's not to say that there's no place for computer scientists in 2020, but it's probably not app development. There's probably better uses for their skills too. So one thing that I think college gets wrong in general is like, conflating those two things. And also isolating these things. And a lot of computer science programs will tie it together with math, which like sort of makes sense, but I don't know. That's just not how, as a school, I would organize those things all together. The next gripe that I have is that academically, the lecture model basically worthless. And so what they'll do is they'll do these lectures, that, especially in computer science, I think of them a lot like, I learned this, I defy you to learn it also. It's like they get very proud of like how many people can't get into their program. Like as an educator, that is like the peak of whackness to me. Is like it's a very exclusive program. It's like that's code for I'm such a shitty teacher. I need most of the work done for me already. What a flex. I can only teach people who can basically do it already. So like there's that. A lot of just the structure of it is not very valuable. But you wouldn't know that because their system of assessment is so broken, you wouldn't be able to tell whether or not somebody learned it or not. And what we end up with instead is like the Silicon Valley inspired can you reverse a linked list on a whiteboard problems. Those were never like things that these companies were doing. They were tests to see, did you pay attention in class? And here's the fucked up thing. The reason they had to ask those questions is because they don't trust the degrees. The piece of paper, they don't believe them because you can get them without knowing this shit. And furthermore, I've been training people how to pass those tests for 5 years now. In like a week or two. Certainly not 4 years. And they passed the reversing a linked list thing. So the predictive value of these assessments is trash. And like the pushback I hear when I, spit fire about this stuff is like, well, I didn't think my computer science education was worthless. That was never the measure of whether or not $100,000 in 4 years of your fucking prime earning years was a good use of your time. It wasn't worthless. So we need to consider these things in terms of like, what are the opportunity costs of this? What better uses of this time? What better uses of this money? Even if you do want to be a computer scientist, you want to be a machine learning expert, you want to be a roboticist, you want to be like some of these things where a lot of the math is really directly applicable. I have a hard time believing that $100,000 in 4 years, you can't beat college. That just feels like a phenomenally low bar to me. And then my last gripe with this is computer science is taught in such an abstract fashion that if we compared this to something like baseball, you go, okay, welcome to our baseball program. Now, hopefully in middle school and high school, you studied some of the famous games. You maybe even recreated some famous baseball games yourself. For undergrad, we still will not be playing the game. We'll be talking about the mechanics behind the game. Why are the rules what they are? How does one determine optimal bat velocity? And then it's not until grad school that you actually play your first fucking baseball game. So what I'd like to see a lot more of in formal computer science programs is looking for those opportunities to create relevance, to directly apply these computational concepts. Cool. So in closing, the thing I want to leave you with is thanks. Is my manifesto. So these are the things that I think school should be. So we talked about the 3 C's. That's non-negotiable to me. We've talked about mastery. I think education should be fixed mastery, variable time. The only part that we didn't really get to talk about is humanism. Humanism gets conflated sometimes with like secular humanism. They're not the same thing. Humanism is probably roughly 100 years old at this point. Some of the luminaries in this are Maslow, so hierarchy of needs, that guy. He was a father of humanism. Maria Montessori, so Montessori method, where it's all exploratory play and that kind of thing, that's humanist. And then one of my favorites is this guy named Carl Rogers. Let me see if I can find this. Carl Rogers, humanism quotes. There was this one thing I saw that, maybe it was this? I really hope I can find it. Shit. All right, I'll paraphrase. So Carl Rogers, this is like mid-50s, I think, early 60s maybe. And it comes to this realization that he has never been able to effectively teach somebody how to teach. He's like, that's curious. Why can't I do this? And so he starts examining a little bit more. And he goes, if I'm being honest, I don't know that I've ever effectively taught students either. I know that I've helped them get there, but the things that had the most impact, I don't think had anything to do with like my teaching. And so the thing I was looking for was he's writing this as a letter to himself, and he's like scared. He's like, I'm not ready to share my musings with anybody yet. And then, so in a second letter, he writes that like this all sounds like pretty tame. That all right, so students should primarily be responsible for their own learning. We have to address the whole person. So this whole person idea is that students aren't like just buckets that you dump knowledge into. They have bad days. They have emotional blockage. Just because I want to make sure I got some mileage out of this diagram because I think it's cool. Things like, so in this, traffic cop is figuring out what's relevant and what's not. All that information also gets passed to your amygdala. What your amygdala does is it goes, what is your emotional connection with this? Is this something you're afraid of? Is this something you're excited about? Is this something you're indifferent to? And then after it determines your emotional response, it sends a message to your hypothalamus to trigger your body. So that might be start calming down. That might be amp up. And when you get amped up because you had an emotional response to something, this is like, your brain doesn't make any distinction between running from a tiger and imagining you're running from a tiger. Chemically, same thing in your brain. And so to help you more effectively run away from the tiger, certain things shut down. For example, your fingernails stop growing. Your fingernails don't need to grow while you're running away from a lion. Another thing that happens is you stop being able to learn things. Because why would you need to learn things? We're going to redirect all of that energy into getting away from the tiger more effectively. So as an educator, if you're not clued into that, you can't be effective at your job. So rather than, where is it? Education Manifesto. Rather than treating this as like, oh, I don't care what's going on in your life, I don't care what emotional relationship you already have with this, which a lot of times is like, I'm an underrepresented group, I already kind of don't feel welcome here, I don't have a lot of role models. All of that needs to be kind of taken into account in the educational process. Authenticity. Anybody who's been in an education program of mine, or any of you in this lesson, wow, that guy swears a lot. Yeah, that's me. That's who I am. But I don't want students to feel like they have to present themselves in any kind of particular way. That gets in the way. Now that's like that's a barrier that I need to work through. And like I also want teachers to model that. And it's less of a power dynamic of like, this is my classroom and I am letting you be in it, and more like we're all trying to figure something out. We're trying to figure out some greater truth together, and I play a role in that, and you play a role in that, but it's way less of a power dynamic and more, we are all choosing to get together and learn. And that's what Carl Rogers came to, as he was like, well, wait a minute, the disturbing part of this, the part he was so worried is like, oh no, then college is a terrible idea. Because if people wanted to learn things, they would get together and learn. And if the most effective way to figure any of this stuff out is to just like do stuff and get guidance and do this stuff in communities, oh, that's not what we're doing at all. That means K-12 is like based on a lot of misunderstandings. That means college is based on a lot of misunderstandings. And I think he was right. I think that holds true today. And every example I've seen of schools that practice humanism, that's borne out to be true. And even a lot of independent studies of Montessori, I think it's very curious that Montessori has like demonstrably been a very effective approach to early childhood education. And then we stopped doing it. There's been no evidence that it's less effective for a 16-year-old or a 36-year-old or a 76-year-old. And every time that I've done that in my experience as an adult educator, it's worked just fine. And the last element of that is choice and freedom. And I think that's also a non-negotiable thing. Rather than I'm the teacher and you will go through my prescribed process for this, I didn't get to talk about a lot of curriculum things, but rather than you do this and you do this and you do this and you do this, like I'd rather see these things have a lot more freedom. If you're learning how to build a web page, there's not a ton of need to learn these in a particular order. Or put differently, there was, in this Topic Ghettos one, I looked this morning at like what a traditional math sequence is in America, where you do this, and then you do this, and you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. And
You let the tigers out.
yeah, it implies some kind of order to this. You have to do this in this order. And people assume that math is like some kind of linear discipline. Of course it fucking isn't. And like the belief that it is why I challenge you to find an adult who can say what a polynomial is. Yet this is what we're teaching to 11-year-olds. And so I think that like the fact that we have essentially an enumerate society beyond arithmetic speaks to that not actually being that linear a thing. And so if I was to reimagine this, I would view it something like this, where you have a lot of practical applications that use a lot of these ideas, but they're not necessarily all that order dependent. And I wouldn't underestimate how much power there is in allowing a student to go, all right, I got my arithmetic down. Do I want to learn how, like, logic for debate? Do I want to figure out how products get priced, which is graphing, that's algebra. There's lots of cool stuff in there. Or do I want to figure out how to do formal guessing and estimation? Just that anybody would trust you with the power to make that choice changes the entire vibe of a school. And so, for my dollar, that's what I want a school to look like. Thank you for letting me rant at you. Any like one-off questions they don't want me to talk for 4 minutes about? Go Going once.
So, what is the difficulty in like actually implementing this at a real school with like regulatory deadlines and challenges, and they have to fit their curriculum in they don't have very little time.
Sure. So I think the biggest challenge there is lack of creativity and lack of interest. Because these problems are very hard to solve, but like I said, they're not impossible. And in the adult education space, the people who regulate code schools in every state, including Colorado, they're not curriculum experts. They're consumer protection agencies. They don't give a shit what sequence you do things in. They care that you do the thing that you said you were going to do, and you're not stealing people's money. As long as you're doing that, they don't care, which is part of why I get so irritated that there's such a lack of bravery around trying stuff out. But a lot of that is because the people making these decisions and doing and designing these programs are not educators, they're programmers. The programmers know everything, so of course they would be able to come up with an optimal whatever the fuck, and they don't. So that's one problem. If it's not developers, it's startup people, and that's even worse. Because startup people are always looking for this magical scaling piece, because that's what Silicon Valley investors have trained them to look for. That's been their feedback loop. That's what they get cookies for, is finding scaling factors. And as I've said, I don't believe they exist in this scenario, but you can't get venture capital money doing that. And so I think that's probably the single biggest barrier. But with things like the erstwhile program that we were a part of once upon a time, we actually weren't in violation of any regulations. So in Colorado, the rule is you don't need to report when a student graduates if they graduate within 150% of their stated graduation date. And as long as you're giving them regular feedback about when that date is, you're on the right side of the consumer protection piece. That fits right in with this and go, cool. So it's nominally a 6-month program. At your current pace, that's looking like 6 months and 3 days. That's looking like 7 months. That's looking like 5 months. And you can see that update over time. There's challenges in implementing that, but there was challenges in doing any of this shit. And I don't think that that's honestly that insurmountable a one. And in the K-12 space, we actually have a ton of space for this also. And in fact, a lot of this stuff has been borne out in charter schools and alternative schools and stuff. Plenty of schools do this stuff successfully in the K-12 space in a monstrously regulated environment. Cool, what else? Yeah.
On the curriculum side,
Mm-hmm.
we were talking about how that flexibility is really important.
Yeah.
But you do have to tell a state regulator what you're going to teach at some level.
Sure.
I've been consulting with the...
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
So what you do there is, this is where standards come in handy. So if we're saying fixed mastery, well, mastery of what? What we try to do in code schools, say, well, employers will hire people that can do this and this and this. So that's step one. Step two is you go, all right, how can I phrase that as a measurable objective? So you might say something like, all right, employers want people who can demonstrate basic programming skills. And so the standard is demonstrate basic programming proficiency. So you go, okay, next step down from that, what is an assessment that we think authentically measures that? And so in my mind, an authentic test of that is with some looping and conditionals and variables and functions and scope. If a student can solve some pretty straightforward problems in those, I would say 10 times in a row without making a mistake. That would be mastery of a standard like that. And I really like those style of assessments also, because you do 9 in a row and you get one wrong, you don't go home and try again next week. You just keep going, because those assessments are part of the learning process. And at some point, you deep into the grooves enough where you can reliably do this 10 times in a row. And so, okay, so we have employer expectation, we have standard, we have assessment, and then the last piece of this is curriculum. How can I prepare somebody to be able to do well on that assessment? And so what I'm saying to the regulators is, by the end of this program, all these students will be able to demonstrate mastery of these standards. That's fine. That gets the consumer protection people very happy. In fact, if your assessments are rigorous enough, you're probably doing a better job of that than any school that thinks they're accurately predicting performance already is. I think where a lot of over-nervous startup people go wrong is they go, I don't know if the Ranger's going to like that, and then they say, and then we're going to do this on day 3 of week 5, and that's when you start painting yourself into a corner. But I don't think very many regulatory bodies actually give a shit about that part of it. They do.
Can confirm. My friends in Florida or Texas. I got some picky people.
Other states, different story.
Okay.
I've only worked with the Colorado regulators. Colorado regulators are pretty loosey-goosey on that. New York is a goddamn nightmare. They might be worse than California, but it's hard to be worse than California.
Texas is kind of pushing too.
Texas is up there. So there are some states that are fussier about that than others, but in Colorado, no excuses. One more question.
Don't you want to hang around and listen to regulatory talk?
One more. What's on your mind?
I got pages if you know what else.
Yeah, hit me.
This is kind of on a tangent, but if you're a developer without 20% time, what's the best way to keep getting better? I find that you often tend to take time to solve the kind of surface level things that are related to the task you're working on. You don't get much time to kind of get to those deeper principles that we want to get to.
Sure.
I can think of a couple options, but I'm curious if you have opinions on what would be a good way to approach that.
So, man, this is a tough one. I'm actually not that big a fan of 20% time. I'm kind of on the Gabe Newell kick of 100% time. I want people to have that much freedom over the work that they do. I understand that's not the case everywhere. So, in light of that, I think having some disciplined time outside of work is feasible and reasonable. So, for example, what I mean by disciplined is, all right, I do my work. I don't get a ton of chance to prepare myself for the career that I want to have. I'm doing this job, but I'd like to be doing this job someday, and that needs some prep that I'm not getting there. So you can say, all right, so I spend 1 hour 3 times a week, this time to this time, working through this. And if you can incorporate some 3 C's in there, this can be me and 3 of my buddies who are in this boat also, we get together and have a book club or something, and our coaching is coming from a mentor who's willing to hang out with us for 15 minutes a week and answer some questions. And they helped us find a good curriculum. So you can recreate a lot of those experiences that way. Another way would be to try to sell this to your job. Is hey, I love this place. I'd like to stick around a little bit, but I need some time to help working on these things. So it doesn't need to be as formal as 20% time, but you can say, I would like to be here by this time, and I'd like to work with you to help me get there in a way that also benefits the company. And sometimes that's, I hang out a little bit on this project, but if you're explicit about what your goals are, that's stuff your manager should be doing for you anyway, but as we've discussed, management is hard, ergo most people are bad at it. If you come to them proactively, essentially having done a lot of their job for them, then you're just kind of giving them a yes or a no, and that's a hard thing to say no to. So, that'd be my recommendation.
It's help me, can I be more awesome in this job? Is that okay?
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, Kyle. We are looking for speakers for next month and future months. So if you would like to speak up here, please seek me out after this or send me a message on Slack. With that, let's have a great night.
Yeah. Also, come to Develop Denver. Develop Denver is August 13th and 14th. We're getting the site up. We're probably going to have a different event in the winter. Develop Denver, Develop Denver, Develop Denver.
You were in my fast.
All right. Thanks for coming, everyone.
I feel like I was just at Develop Denver.